All right, so welcome everyone to today's Office of Political Practices City Candidate Campaign Finance Training. We're joined today by Jeff Mangan, Kim Trujillo, and Katie Beal. We're all at the Office of Political Practices and here to support you with all your campaign finance questions and with all your reports. So all material from today's training will be posted on the COPP's website and on our social media. So we'll be sending out some emails with all these resources for you, so stay tuned. Okay, so in today's training, again, this is focused on 2019 city candidates. If you're attending this training and you're not a city candidate, this training will provide a good overview of general campaign finance, and you can always email us with more specific questions. And that email is at the bottom of the slide under the picture of the Capitol at cpphelp@mt.gov. So for city candidates today, this training will cover the legal requirements for all city candidates, all the forms and reporting dates that you'll need to be familiar with. And then we'll cover the basics of campaign finance. Specifically, we're going to dive into contributions, expenditures, and debts. Then after that, we'll review the campaign finance review process, which is basically answers the question of what happens once you file a finance report. Then we'll cover some tips, resources, and if time allows, we'll field any questions that you all have. So first, legal requirements of candidates. It is always the candidate's responsibility and obligation to understand and comply with all Montana campaign finance laws. Throughout your campaign, you'll always have COPP staff, just a phone call, email, or office stop away for you. But at the end of the day, it's always the candidate's responsibility to ensure that your campaign complies with all legal campaign finance requirements. So to make sure you're ready for that, definitely familiarize yourself with Montana's campaign finance laws. And to help you with that, on the COPP's website, you can find really great educational information, and that should help you navigate the campaign finance process. Okay, so first, as a city candidate, there's 3 forms you'll need to become familiar with. If you're in this training, you've already filed a C1A statement of candidate. And so this was a form where you said you entered in all your contact information, your banking information for your campaign account, and then the information of your treasurer and or your deputy treasurer. Now with the C1A, if any of your information changes, let's say you update your email address, you change bank accounts, you get a new treasurer, or your treasurer's contact information changes, if any of the information you entered changes, you have 5 days to go back in and update that information and then resubmit your C1A to the Office of Political Practices.
Remember, if you registered as a B candidate, or stating that you were not going to raise or spend more than $500, that's fine. But if you reach that threshold of contributions or expenditures of $500, it's your responsibility to change your C1A and your reporting status to C candidate. Let our office know through an amended C1A form, because you will be required to file campaign finance reports. So keep that in mind.
Mm-hmm. And segue into that, for campaign finance reports, you'll be filing C5s, and we'll go through that much more in depth in the upcoming slides about what is a C5 and what do you need to report and how do you need to report. And then the third form you'll be working with for some of you is a C7, and the C7 is a notice of pre-election contributions. And so this is a form that must be filed if you receive a contribution of $100 or more in the 17 days leading up to an election and including the date of the election. So if you advance all the way to the general and you have a primary, you'll have 2 C7 periods where the 17 days again preceding that election, you'll need to keep track and report all $100 or more contributions within 48 hours. And so with these reports, you'll have a few specific dates you need to keep on your radar. And this slide covers all of them. Now, as you can see, you've got quite a few report dates, and in that C7 period you'll need to keep in mind. But to help you with that, if you navigate to the Office of Political Practices website, and as you can see by the thick green circle, we have a reporting calendars page. And we've tried to make it really clear for folks to know when their reports are due, so you can navigate to this page, click, and there's a couple ways, whether you want to view it as a PDF or as a live calendar, you've got options. And this is always just a click away, so make sure you put these dates in your calendar or just make sure they're on your radar, because again, it's your responsibility to file C5s and C7s with these required timelines.
Now, if your locality does not have a primary, if you don't have a primary election in your district or your city or whatever you're running for, you do not have to worry about the primary C7 period. But you still are required to file the August 6th, August 29th reports. You just don't have to file the C7s. So just be familiar with what your locality, if your locality is having a primary, you need to be aware of that because you'll be responsible for a few additional potential reports.
Great. And then just a few things to note from this slide. Please note that your first C5 is due August 6th, and that's required of you whether you've spent any money or received any money. C5s are required regardless of whether you had money coming in or out of your campaign account. You report every single time there's a C5, no matter the state of your candidate campaign account.
And if you filed as a C-Box candidate and you haven't reached that 500 threshold yet, as of August 6th, for example, you're still required to file the report because you filed as a C-Box. So just don't be thinking because you haven't reached $500 you're not required to report yet. You're still required to report if you filed as a C-Box candidate.
Great.
Any questions, give our office a call. It's a little confusing, I know.
Okay. And now we're going to cover what must be disclosed in your C5 campaign finance report.
All candidates have a role in promoting confidence, transparency, and accountability in our election process. The reason Montana has some very strong campaign finance laws, and they're not for my benefit or Katie's benefit or Kim's benefit, they're for the benefit of the people of the state of Montana. Simply, they allow the citizens to see what a candidate is spending in an election from the moment the candidate files for election to election day. It also allows a candidate or a citizen of the state of Montana to see who is providing money to that candidate's campaign. All generally in real time up to the date of the elections. The reason we have C7s, for example, is because the report it would cover would be after the election, and C7s allow the citizens to see who's giving to a specific campaign prior to the election. So there's a really good reason we do this. The people of the state of Montana come to expect it. We're here to help you report correctly.
Mm-hmm. And so when we talk about campaign finance today, specifically we'll cover contributions, expenditures, and debts. So first with contributions, legally, according to the Montana Code Annotated, a contribution is a distribution of money or anything of value to support or oppose a candidate or ballot issue. So contributions can come from individuals, committees, or other entities, basically anyone or anything that provides campaign with money or goods or services of value for free or at a reduced rate in an effort to support your candidacy. Anything that meets that definition, that's a contribution. So it can be monetary in nature, and a contribution can also be non-monetary. So when you think about contributions, it's important to remember that Montana law defines contribution limits. And these contribution limits, so you see this PDF on the left here. This is, again, very accessible through our website, and we'll cover that in the next slide. But contribution limits apply to each election. So if you have a primary election, contribution limits apply to the primary election, and if you advance, again to the general. If you don't have a primary election and you'll only have a general election, then you have basically one set of contribution limits. So for example, as a city candidate, if you have a primary and a general election, you can receive $180 from, individual Joe Smith for the primary, and then Joe Smith could contribute another $180 for the general election. And if you only have a general election, Joe Smith contribute to your campaign only one single time.
Any questions, just give us a call. Again, if you have a primary opponent in that election, you can receive the 108 up to 180 for both elections, the primary election and the general election.
And then also keep in mind, when you receive contributions, you'll need to designate whether they're intended for the primary or the general election. And we highly advise that you keep your campaign funds, if you will be receiving both primary and general elections, you have to keep that money separate. So have a primary account and have a general election campaign banking account. And then finally, aggregate contribution limits apply for political party committees. And so when you want to dig more deeply into contribution limits and make sure you're very refreshed on these, you can know your limits really simply. Again, go to the Office of Political Practices website, and on that blue horizontal bar you can see fourth from the left, you've got contribution limits. Okay, so we're going to cover all the different types of contributions now. So the first type of contribution a candidate can receive is money that they give to their own campaign. The second is contributions from individuals, so this can be from your neighbor, coworker, friend, etc. Then on the third, we've got fundraisers. Then you can receive contributions from committees. And then refunds and rebates also count as contribution types to your campaign. And then finally, there's loans that count as contributions. We aren't going to go into great detail on the fifth and sixth contribution type on this training. We're going to focus on the first four. So for that first type of contribution, there is no limit on the amount of money that you can give as a candidate to your own campaign. Do keep in mind, though, that if you enter in money that you're giving to your campaign as a contribution, that means that you're not loaning it to your campaign. The difference, of course, between a loan and a contribution is if you're expecting to be reimbursed from campaign funds for money you contribute, you need to enter that as a loan. And if you're putting that money into your campaign and you're not expecting to be reimbursed later, that's a contribution.
You can always loan yourself money, put it in as a loan, and then forgive that loan to yourself, turn it into a contribution at the end of the campaign. But once you put it in as a contribution, you can't, at the end of the campaign, decide that was a loan and attempt for the campaign to pay you back. So if you have any questions at all, again, give us a call and we'll be glad to provide some additional guidance to you.
Awesome. The second type of contribution is contributions your campaign can receive from individuals. And anytime you get a contribution from an individual, keep in mind that there's a $35 threshold. And what we mean by that is that as soon as somebody gives your campaign $35 or more, you have to report that as an individual contribution. And so when you report individual contributions, there's identifying details that you need to include about that contributor. So the first is, of course, their name and their address. Then you need to share information about their employer and occupation. And then you need to designate whether it's a monetary or an in-kind contribution. And an in-kind contribution can be something like stakes for yard signs, or it could be something like volunteering a piece of, or donating a piece of art for a silent auction that your campaign's doing. It's any exchange of monetary value that isn't monetary directly.
And again, contribution limits apply to in-kind contributions as well. So if someone is providing $500 of fence posts for signs for your campaign, you can only accept $180 of that as in kind, and you'd be responsible to pay the individual for the remaining balance of that. So just keep in mind contributions limits apply to both in-kind and cash contributions.
And also anonymous contributions are illegal. One more time, anonymous contributions are illegal. So it's especially important with that $35 threshold we just mentioned. If you're getting contributions from somebody and it's less than $35, you need to be tracking who is giving you that money. So if you're selling raffle tickets for $10, you need to track who is buying those raffle tickets, because if somebody buys a $10 raffle ticket and then they give your campaign a $30 contribution as a check, well, they've donated or they've contributed $40 to your campaign and they've now passed the threshold, and you need to disclose that in a C5 that you've got an individual contribution from this person.
And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next couple of slides when we discuss fundraisers.
All right. So fundraisers can, well, when you have a fundraiser for your campaign, you'll need to report each individual fundraiser. So never report, your quarterly fundraisers en masse. Just report each fundraiser each time you have. Pardon that phone call. And so when you report a fundraiser, the details you need to include is an event description. So let us know, was it a raffle, a pass the hat, a silent auction, a spaghetti feed? And then you need to let us know the approximate number of attendees who were at that fundraiser. And then if this is relevant, let us know the number of tickets that were sold and then the total amount raised.
So let's talk about anonymous contributions under 35 and pass the hat fundraisers, for example. Generally everyone has some type of pass the hat event. We suggest that if you plan to have a pass the hat event, that you have some type of envelope that they can mark their name and contact information, so you can track who gave you that $1, $10, $25, what have you. Again, you don't have to report it in the over 35 category, but it's your responsibility to keep track of all of those under 35 categories. So if you have a pass the hat and you have 10 people at your fundraiser, and you mass report $500 from that pass the hat, and we're only 10 people there, math comes out to $50 a person, which may trigger a question from us as to how did 10 people give you $500? So again, that's the reason you need to have good records, who's giving you money, even if it's under 35. So if they do pass that $35 threshold eventually, you can report it correctly. If you don't know who gave you that money, we consider it anonymous, and we would ask you to donate that anonymous contribution to a nonprofit charity.
Great. And then if you're looking for a really great resource to track your under $35 contributions, SIRS, which is it's the database where candidates can electronically file C5s and C1As and all other campaign finance reports. SIRS is really nifty because it can cumulatively track the amount of contributions that an individual or any other entity has given to your campaign. So it's a great idea to enter in if you choose to use SIRS. All contribution information, and SIRS will track it for you. Up next, we're going to cover contributions from committees. And so when you receive a contribution from a committee, you need to first report the date of the contribution, and that's the date the contribution is received by your campaign. It's not the date that it's necessarily put into your campaign finance bank account. And then you need to report the committee type, whether it's a political party committee, an independent committee, an incidental committee, etc. Again, you need to report whether it was a monetary or in-kind contribution. And keep in mind that, of course, like with all contribution limits apply for committee contributions. For expenditures, expenditures are any expenses that your campaign has in order to support you, the candidate. And so when you're tracking your expenditures, you can report it in a C5, or make certain that you're thinking about, is how you're spending money for your campaign auditable? And so what we mean by that is that any expense needs to be paid by a check, debit card, a wire transfer, or any other electronic means that can clearly identify the person who received the payment from your campaign and the date of the payment. So we strongly advise that you do not use petty cash. As of October 1st, 2019, petty cash is no longer allowed for candidates. So again, best practices, just don't use petty cash. And if you have in the past, get away from doing that as soon as possible, because you can't in October. So when you report an expense, you need to disclose whether the expense went to support your primary or your general campaign, the date the payment was made for the expense, and then a description of the expense. So remember too that when you report an expense, you're also making it very transparent to the public about what your campaign is spending money on. So when you report an expense, you'll say things like 50 Vote for Jane t-shirts, or gasoline for a drive from Billings to Helena, X amount of miles, and you are going for this convention. So you want to make sure that when you're reporting, you're including a high level of detail so members of the public can understand what you're spending money on.
And you're going to report the expense within the period that the expenditure was incurred. We'll talk about that a little bit more in debts, but you cannot wait, for example, to the end of the election to report all of your expenditures. So within the reporting period, you will be reporting all of your contributions during that reporting period, as well as all of your expenditures or incurred debts, which we'll talk about here in a few minutes.
We're going to do a deep dive into one of the most commonly confusing expenditure errors we see with candidates, and that's reporting paid communications. So anytime you have a candidate, as a candidate, you have an ad, how do you report it? So on this side, you can see we've got these three boxes: platform, quantities, and subject matter. So anytime you have a paid material you're putting out, whether it's a flyer, a Google ad, a Pandora ad, a Facebook boosted post, you need to report the platform, quantities, and subject matter in the purpose description of the expenditure. So when we say platform, we're talking about the medium where the ad occurred. So it could be Facebook, it could be a yard sign, it could be a billboard. If you run an ad in your local, let's say the Helena IR newspaper, then the platform is the IR. Quantities, there's two ways to think about quantities. If it's a physical material, like a flyer or a billboard or yard signs, we need to know the quantity that was created for your campaign. So it could be 500 yard signs or 2 billboards. If it's a digital ad, then we need to know the length that the ad ran. So for example, if it's a radio, we need to know that the ad ran from July 31st through August 15th. Or if you boosted a Facebook post, we want to know that it ran from August 15th to August 30th. And then the subject matter is, what did your ad actually talk about? Did you discuss your agricultural policy? Did you discuss your plans for education? Include the subject matter.
Again, if we go back to the beginning of the reason we have campaign finance laws, it's very apparent why we have detail in reporting such communications. Every election cycle, citizens will be receiving 3 or 4, or in some cases, many more flyers, for example, in their mail from the same candidate. And detailed reporting requirements allow an individual to distinguish between the material they received in August versus the material they received in October, for example. And that's the reason for the subject matter requirement. So if you have 500 flyers, subject matter, economic development, 500 flyers, subject matter, general biography, that should be enough for a citizen to distinguish amongst both flyers, and they can say, oh, this one costs this amount, this one costs this amount, and they understand it. Where they wouldn't be able to find that information if you just placed in a reporting, $2,000 for printing. $2,000 for printing does not provide the citizen any information at all as to what they are looking at, whereas specifying quantity, subject matter, and platform does.
And while we're discussing campaign ads, we're going to briefly cover attribution. And attribution is a paid for by information that's required anytime your campaign puts out any paid materials. So anytime you put out, again, a billboard, yard signs, t-shirt, or anything that's supporting your campaign, so this could be as simple as a keychain saying vote for Johnson, you need to include attribution information, and that information needs to identify the name and mailing address of the entity that paid for the communication, and it also needs to include if you have a political...
if you're in a race that has a political, that isn't nonpartisan, it's a partisan race, you're required to identify the party. Most local city elections that we're in now are nonpartisan, so you don't have to worry about that. But if you are in one that is partisan, it is a requirement.
And then if your material is too small to include attribution information, you have to file it with the Office of Political Practices. And when you file it, you need to include all that attribution information, and then we will publish it on our website. So
and a copy of whatever the material is, whether it's a photo of the pencil that you're handing out, or a picture of the banner ad that's going to run at the, at the bottom of a mobile ad, for example. We'll determine whether or not the material is too small, and either accept it or ask that you place the attribution on the material if we think that you can.
All right, and then up next for contributions, we're going to cover debts. And as Jeff has mentioned, just like with a contribution or an expenditure, a debt and a loan must be reported within the same level, it must be reported at the same date that it was received. So within that same reporting period, if you have a debt or a loan you take on as a candidate, it has to be reported in that reporting period for a C5 report.
So if you have if you incurred an expense, and still Montana, there's still folks that extend folks credit, particularly in small towns, and they say, "Don't worry, Bob, we're not going to send you an invoice till the end of the month." And that falls outside the reporting period. It's still your responsibility to report the incurrence of the expenditure, reported as a debt that it incurred on August 2nd, and then you'll show the payment history later. But you cannot wait till the end of the month, till the invoice comes, to report the expense. The same with a loan. If someone wants to loan you money for your campaign, just remember that campaign finance limits apply. So they can loan you up to $180 for your campaign in each election, but that's it. A spouse cannot loan you more than the 180, or family member. It applies to everyone, except for yourself. You can loan yourself any amount of money. Just report it as a loan if you want to get paid back with campaign funds at the end of the campaign.
All right, so now that we've covered the basics of campaign finance, which will help you when you file your C5 campaign finance reports, we're going to cover what happens next in that process. So as a candidate, once you filed a C5, the Office of Political Practices reviews all reports that are filed, and then once we've had time to review it and take notes of anything that needs more detail or requires your attention, we'll send you an inspection report. And the inspection report will identify, we need more details about this expenditure, or you're missing information about this contributor's employment or occupation. So the inspection report will detail all that. And throughout your campaign, you'll file multiple C5 reports, so you'll get multiple inspection reports. So once you receive one inspection report, of course, keep an eye on the other C5 filing dates that you'll need to meet, and keep on top of those inspection reports, because once you receive them, it's your responsibility to respond and amend reports so that all required information is included. So the next step is, once your campaign concludes, and once you've closed out your campaign, which means that you're no longer receiving contributions, no longer making expenses, and that all outstanding debts or loans are paid, then the COPP will follow up with you with an inclusive exam. And this exam will then go back and audit all those inspection reports we've sent and any amended C5s you followed up with, and we'll make sure that any outstanding issues from over the course of your campaign are entirely wrapped up, and that all details that you needed to disclose in a C5 or C7 have been shared, so it's very clear for the public. And this slide, again, just throughout this review process and as you file reports, just remember, again, it's always your responsibility to understand and know the law. It's always your responsibility to make sure you're following up when you get an inspection report, and when you get that final exam. And then always along the way, you have the Office of Political Practices as a resource who is standing by and ready to help you, and is very accessible any time of the day from 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, for any of your campaign finance questions or needs. So again, it's your responsibility, but we are here to help you every step of the way, so don't hesitate. And yeah.
It's not that intimidating, and neither are we. We're here to help, and we just want to make sure that you're reporting correctly, so people in the state of Montana can see what's happening in your campaign if they choose to, and you're confident in what you're reporting.
Okay, so now that we've covered campaign finance, here are a few tips we advise to make sure you can be confident and fly through the processes. So first, make sure you know when you have campaign finance reporting dates, and when there's C5 periods, and when there's the fair campaign period. So get on that calendar page of our website and add these into whatever calendar you use to manage your time. Again, that's your responsibility, and it's very helpful to do this up front. A second tip that comes in really helpful is if you need more space when you're filing a campaign finance report, you can always include an addendum. One of the few instances where we see people needing more space, especially if they file in SIRS, because you have a 150 character limit, is when they're detailing those paid communications, so those ads that you put out as a candidate. So if you need more detail because you had 5 radio ads from your local radio station, and they all cover different subjects, when you get to that purpose description, just put in C addendum, and then email us at cppcompliance@mt.gov and identify that for your C5 that covered these dates, this addendum needs to be included in your expenses. And then, yeah, we will make sure that that is noted for the public, that there's an addendum for them to reference.
We strongly suggest that you do not wait until the reporting deadline to report. Unfortunately, many people wait till the last day, and when you wait till the last day, several things can happen. You can run into problems locating information. You can run into problems uploading information to the website because so many people are on the website. So on and so forth. Or if you have a question, you may have a harder time reaching our office to answer those questions, and you still are required, even with all of that on that last day, to file. So we suggest that you plan to file your report a couple of days early. That way you're safe. There's plenty of time to ask us questions, and you can feel confident with what you reported. And if there was an issue, you still have a couple of days to go in and amend it if you need to prior to the filing date. So just plan to file early and make keep everybody happy, including my staff. And read your inspection reports. The staff spend a lot of time doing a cursory review, but we're looking for certain things, common mistakes. So if you get an inspection report and it says that you may want to take a look at updating a specific section of your report, go in, follow the recommendations of the CPP staff. It will help you in the long run, particularly if someone decides to file a complaint against your campaign or your candidacy, or if you choose to ignore an important inspection report note. You also risk notice of non-compliance from my office, and that's something you don't want to have to deal with either. So just make sure you read them, go in and make the changes as necessary, and all should be good.
Right. And then a great way to stay in touch for just tips and report reminders is to follow us on social media. And then, of course, anytime you need, contact our office for any questions anytime during regular business hours. And we've got 2 more slides. So this last slide is just a way to remind you of all the resources you have available to you to help you and make sure you can confidently comply. So this picture on the left is of the Office of Political Practices website. From that blue horizontal bar, you can see we've highlighted forms, which is the C1A, the C5, the C7. Any type of report you might need to file is on that page. Then you've got the reporting calendars page, contribution limits page. There's an About Us page if you want to just understand more the role of our office. And then a really, really significant page for you to get familiar with is the candidate and committee information page, which is the one with the capital on it in the upper left on our homepage. And so on that page you can find information like a frequently asked question for 2019 city candidates and the all-important accounting and reporting manual for candidates and treasurers. You can see a screenshot of that on the right. So
do yourself a favor, just report electronically, go in and use the CERS system. Everybody will be required to report electronically after this last legislative session soon, so you might as well get a jump on it and dive right into the electronic reporting. Again, we're here to help with that process.
And we have a guide that'll walk you through step-by-step how to file in CERS, so you will thrive. Finally, again, just to hit this home, call us when you have questions. Take out your phone right now and follow us on social media because we have those platforms, and make sure you get reminders on all the platforms and social media platforms you use, at least for Facebook and Twitter. So anyways, give us a call when you've got questions. If you're in Helena, stop by the office and introduce yourself or come with questions. We can always meet with you one-on-one. Just, we're here for you. So good luck with your campaigns, and thank you for running.
Yep, thank you for running. Thank you for being part of our democracy, and let us know if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thanks.